Have you ever woken gasping in the dead of night, with that uncanny sensation of someone watching you? Worse still, have you ever felt as though you'd been touched intimately by something that wasn't there? For centuries, accounts such as these have accumulated in the shadows of history, whispering the name of an entity that visits men in their sleep, seducing them with forbidden caresses and gradually stealing their souls. It bears a feared name, Succubus. But what if I told you that this creature, a symbol of medieval erotic terror and demonic fascination, may have been born of a real woman? In this video, we shall plunge into the forgotten story of Lysandra, a young woman cloistered in a remote Balkan convent in the 12th century. She was unlike the others. Her beauty was hushed, her gaze unsettling, and at night, the whispers swelled into cries of pleasure and dread. The church sought to erase her name, yet ancient manuscripts, hidden diaries, and accursed ruins still murmur her truth. Throughout this grim tale, you will discover how forbidden desire, religious oppression, and the fear of the feminine intertwined. In a spiral of blood and madness, Lysandra did more than merely live. She transcended the limits of both flesh and spirit. And in the end, when every candle is on the verge of guttering out and a chill runs down your spine, you will ask yourself, is the myth of the succubus merely legend? Or is it the pale mask of something that still watches us from the darkest corners of night? Now bar the doors, keep the lights burning, and join me in uncovering the carnal origin of terror. For not all nightmares are born of imagination. Perched between damp mountains and mist-shrouded coniferous forests, the monastery of Veselgrad was a place where silence blurred into oblivion. Built by Benedictine monks at the close of the 11th century, far from the main roads, the cloister served as a refuge for repentant souls, disgraced nobles, and young women sent by force of kin to serve the faith. It was there, between cold, stone walls and ceaseless prayers, that 16-year-old Lysandra of Durnova arrived. The reasons for her being sent remain unclear. Some accounts claim her mother, a courtesan entangled with powerful Hungarian nobility, offered her to the convent to escape scandal. Others suggest Lysandra herself was delivered as part of a silent pact to appease something that had plagued her bloodline for generations. What is certain is that her presence did not go unnoticed, described as having skin so pale it seemed translucent, long hair the shade of burnt ash, and eyes that seemed to absorb all surrounding light. Lysandra never blended with the other novices. She shunned conversation, refused the prolonged fasts, and spent hours locked in the old underground chapel of the monastery, where martyrs were believed to have been interred. It was there that the first reports emerged. Sister Agnieszka, charged with cleaning the chapel, swore she heard muffled sounds coming from the crypt one pre-dawn hour, moans and whispers in tongues she could not recognize. When she ventured closer, she saw a bluish flame flickering beneath the door and felt a heat impossible in that frigid chamber. Days later, Agnieszka vanished without trace. The only clue, a dark stain like dried blood trickling from one of the chapel's stained glass windows. The monastery's records, later sealed and forbidden by the diocese, mention increasingly disquieting phenomena. Monks would fall ill overnight, consumed by fever and erotic delirium, murmuring Lysandra's name in their dreams. 2 were found dead in their cells, bodies stiff, eyes rolled back, and frozen smiles etched on their lips, expressions the inquisitor friar would describe as terror-stricken pleasure. When questioned, Lysandra never showed fear or guilt. Her tone was serene, almost maternal. She claimed to dream of an angel descending from the chapel ceiling and enveloping me in sacred ecstasy. When the abbot attempted to exorcise her, he encountered something unexpected. Lysandra knelt and chanted passages from the Song of Songs in Latin, but with an intonation strangely lascivious. A hurriedly scrawled note in a codex records that the abbot had to be restrained. He had attempted to tear his own flesh after the ceremony, murmuring that she had entered through his eyes. Lysandra's seclusion was decreed. She was locked in the crypt, its doors sealed with salt crosses and runic symbols borrowed from local pagan rites. Yet the nights grew no quieter. Screams echoed from beneath the earth, and ghostly feminine shapes were seen kneeling before chalices in the refectory, greedily licking the remnants of consecrated wine. A novice was discovered catatonic in the confessional, purple bruises encircling her throat and a crumpled note clutched in her hand, bearing but 4 words: "She taught me to love as fallen angels love." The monastery was then closed by papal decree, and the few who remained were compelled to take perpetual vows of silence. But the legend did not die there. Local shepherds spoke of seeing, on new moon nights, a female figure wandering the lakes, edge behind the convent, her skin shimmering by moonlight and her feet sinking into the mud without leaving prints. Entire flocks fled the valley, and children born in nearby villages began to suffer recurring nightmares of a dark-eyed mother whispering secrets into their heads. Though the cloister was cleansed with fire and holy relics, something, so they say, survived beneath the charcoal black stones, and the name Lysandra vanished from official records. Yet it lived on in hushed breaths among those too fearful to speak it aloud, a name murmured as curse or invocation. The surviving trial transcripts reveal a grotesque contrast between ecclesiastical rigor and the fascination her presence inspired. The ecclesiastical court, presided over by inquisitors dispatched from the Holy See, saw in her the embodiment of an ancient evil. But behind the cold accusations lay a more intimate terror, the fear that this young woman was not merely possessed, but awakening something dormant within the judges themselves. Interrogated for weeks by the flicker of consecrated candles, Lysandra never cried out. Her motionless eyes reflected the flames like deep mirrors, and her answers came with the calm detachment of one watching others drown. Asked about the convent's phenomena, she replied, "I am not the origin. I am merely the veil that has been lifted." When questioned about her nocturnal angel, she spoke of a being with wings of shadow and a voice made of perfume, an entity that taught her of love unburdened by guilt, of pleasure as prayer, of flesh as the key to the soul. The torturer's accounts are the most disturbing of all. It is said that when instruments of pain were applied, 3 men reacted in inexplicable ways. One fell into a deep trance, smiling as tears ran down his face. Another fainted, his body rigid with a sudden and bleeding erection. The third fled, screaming that she was the Word made flesh, and the Word was in the beginning. During the trial, there followed a strange proliferation of vivid dreams among the clergy. Some claimed Lysandra visited their beds, offering revelations in exchange for kisses. Others compulsively jotted down fragments of inverted psalms. One monk who testified against her was found dead in his cell on the eve of sentencing. His eyes gouged out and a phrase scrawled in blood on the walls, "He saw too much." The inevitable sentence was pronounced with solemn ceremony. Lysandra was to be burned alive in the public square of nearby Branicevo, as a warning to all young women who might dare tread the path of lust. Yet before the execution, she made one final request to be allowed to sing a hymn. What emerged was no familiar chant. Some recounted a low hypnotic murmur that seemed to reverberate through their bones. Others said that during those haunting minutes the sky darkened and an unnatural silence fell upon the crowd, as though the earth itself held its breath. When the pyre was lit, they say she did not scream. She gazed upward and smiled. Her final words were, "I do not die, I return." And return she did, The decades that followed were marked by ever more unsettling occurrences throughout the surrounding regions. Epidemics struck exclusively men, driving peasants to madness. Children were born with dark eyes and vivid prophetic dreams. Most disturbing of all, a secret sect known as the Brides of the Midnight began to gather in caverns near the convent's ruins. Women of all ages united in a forbidden devotion to the Queen of Flames. Apocryphal texts discovered in 1782 by an Austro-Hungarian antiquarian describe invocation rituals echoing Lysandra's visions. One reads, "When the flesh burns, the spirit is freed. When pleasure meets pain, true prayer is born." Lysandra was not consumed by the fire. She was liberated by it. During the 19th century, occult scholars noted correlations between the succubus figure, as widely disseminated in grimoires and demonological treatises, and Lysandra's tale. The descriptions aligned perfectly. Dark eyes, nocturnal, presence, lethal seduction, and the draining of life through desire. Yet a crucial difference remained. While succubi were perceived as purely demonic monsters, Lysandra's image retained a human trace, a memory of injustice and suffering. She was both victim and tormentor, and perhaps all the more dangerous for it. At the turn of the 20th century, a circle of Viennese psychoanalysts, including a disciple of Freud, identified recurring erotic dreams in their patients, featuring a woman whispering archaic Latin phrases and bearing symbols matching those in the Veselgrad records. One recounted an encounter with a saint who made me weep with pleasure, then showed me my own grave. It seems Lysandra's curse was not bound to the convent stones, but to an idea, a belief, a collective memory. As though her presence had seeped into the cracks of time, waiting only to be recalled before returning. In our modern world, where desire is repressed by new forms of control, perhaps she has more room than ever to roam. Lysandra's death should have sealed her story in flame and oblivion, yet what followed was even more disquieting. Rather than perish, it seemed she had passed through the veil of reality itself. No longer bound by flesh, she became an archetype, an entity dwelling on the threshold between longing and damnation. It was in this void of rational explanation that her cult was born. The earliest signs of her transformation appeared in the centuries after her execution. In the 13th century, scattered reports surfaced in remote Balkan villages. Men found dead in their beds, bodies wasted yet faces aglow with ecstasy. Nuns recounting dreams of a woman who kissed them and left petal-shaped marks upon their skin. Peasants speaking of a lady in white walking across the lake at night, always preceding some calamity. In 1307, the Inquisition seized a heretical manuscript known as the Codex Somniorum. Within, a deserting monk claimed to have been visited for 13 consecutive nights by a figure calling herself Daughter of Fire. She taught him of the forbidden delights of the spirit and insisted that hell was not punishment, but liberation. He described her, cold as marble, eyes dark as death, voice echoing within the bones, every detail matching precisely the old Veselgrad accounts. From that moment, the symbolic transition was complete. Lysandra ceased to be merely a cursed woman of her age and became a mutable spirit traversing dreams, feeding desires and punishing deniers. Her likeness fitted seamlessly into medieval Europe's crystallizing lore of the succubus, female demons, who, according to treatises like the Malleus Maleficarum, visited men by night, seduced them, drained their vitality, and often led them to death. But unlike those bestial winged monstrosities, Lysandra's succubus was all too human, beautiful, delicate, yet harboring an abyss in her eyes. Some occultists began linking her to pre-Christian fertility and underworld goddesses, Lilith or Inanna, proposing that the succubus myth was simply a demonized continuation of these ancient deities. In this view, Lysandra was the latest incarnation of an eternal archetype that resurfaces whenever religious or sexual repression reaches its zenith. By the 16th century, clandestine alchemical circles revered Lysandra as the obscure Sophia, the dark wisdom that does not deny the flesh but exalts it as a pathway to the divine. Ritualists sought to invoke her through lucid dreaming, abstinence, and codified erotic practices. In many accounts, the entity did not kill. Rather, she granted visions, premonitions, and profound ecstasies that changed those who received them forever. But every gift exacted a price. Some who claimed contact with the Lady of Midnight went mad. Others became dependent, yearning for her nightly visits. A few ceased eating or speaking as if their souls had been partly torn away, leaving only bodies desperate for return. The most famous modern case was that of Gregor Halwitz, an early 20th century expressionist artist who insisted he could paint only under the command of an unseen muse. His canvases, brimming with dark-eyed women and alchemical symbols, caused scandal. After his death, investigators found dozens of ikai, diaries describing nocturnal sexual encounters with an entity promising the secret of creation. His final entry read, "She is not a demon. She is the reminder of the freedom we were forced to fear." Over the centuries, the succubus became a fixture of collective imagination, a symbol of forbidden longing and its attendant doom. Yet, Lysandra's true story persisted in the margins, a secret whispered among those who knew where to listen. And in times of new repression or obsession with controlling sexuality, the myth resurfaces. For in her transformation, Lysandra transcended all form. She became that which terrifies those who legislate body and soul, freedom that asks no permission. The ruins of the old monastery of Veselgrad still stand, hidden beneath overgrowth and omitted from tourist maps, defying erosion as though something there refuses to vanish. Locals avoid the site, speaking of the Valley of the White Brides, a sinister nickname for ground where by night ghostly women wander among the rubble, their moans a mixture of ecstasy and anguish. In the 1990s, researchers from the University of Belgrade ventured there, aiming to separate myth from reality. Upon arrival, they reported an invisible oppression, as though the air crackled with static. Their recording equipment picked up strange hissings like whispers, even in absolute silence. One student had an intense dream that night, a naked woman with long hair caressing her cheek and whispering a secret in her tongue that she forgot. Upon waking, but which left her in tears and feverish, those recordings were mysteriously lost. 2 team members abruptly abandoned academia, one checking himself into a psychiatric clinic. The final report was never published, and the university severed all official ties with the site. Yet adventurers and occultists continued to visit, drawn by tales of a cursed, erotic place. Some speak of lucid dreams of Lysandra. Others claim physical evidence, hand-shaped bruises, scratch marks, sudden heat, and a sweet scent in the air, even when nothing visible was present. Always at night, always when someone slept upon the ancient altar stones. In obscure internet forums, photographs circulate of alleged manifestations, female silhouettes gliding above the stones, faces reflected in broken glass, a dark-haired figure seen in eyes that should have none. The images are blurry and ambiguous, yet chillingly reminiscent of the old accounts. Some of those posting insist they had never heard of Lysandra before their experience. Her name came to them in dreams, as though whispered directly into their subconscious. More disturbing still are modern manuscripts, contemporary grimoires, describing rituals dedicated to an entity called Lysandra, her name broken into 3 parts as if signifying a profane trinity. These texts outline a nocturnal communion, practiced over 13 consecutive nights with a dream-appearing female. At its conclusion, the adept is said to receive the mark of eternal ecstasy, an invisible yet permanent scar that alters reality forever, and some assert that her presence is no longer confined to a single place. According to students of psyche and occult lore, Lysandra has become an egregore, a collective entity fed by human thoughts, desires, and fears. Her original form may have been flesh and blood, but now she inhabits the collective unconscious, emerging in dreams, fantasies, and lapses of sanity. She is a symbolic virus, a shadow creeping through the cellars of the human mind whenever pleasure and guilt entwine. Thus the succubus we know today, this being of erotic nightmares who seduces and devours, may not be merely a legend crafted by medieval monks. She may be the transformed echo of an unjustly persecuted girl, a spirit that survived the flames and now feeds on what was most ruthlessly repressed: desire. For as long as fear of the flesh endures, there will be room for Lysandra. Lysandra was buried in fire, erased from official tomes and condemned by the very monks who feared her. Yet that which we attempt to bury without understanding seldom stays dead. Today, her story resurfaces in fragments of manuscripts, in whispered tales of forgotten villages, and in marks upon the bodies of those who dare to dream of her. Her journey, from cloister to abyss, poses a disquieting question. Which is more terrifying, the demon that lurks in the night, or the desire we carry and deny by day? Lysandra became the dark reflection of repression, the silent vengeance of forbidden sexuality. Her transformation into succubus was no mere curse, but a symbolic passage forged in pain and denied pleasure. Even now, wrapped in the mists of legend, her presence pulses on. She needs no body to exist. She lives in myths, in nocturnal deliriums, in the eyes of anyone who dares look inward and acknowledge what they have been taught to fear. And perhaps, when you extinguish the lights tonight, lie down in silence and close your eyes, you will sense her too. A gentle touch at the nape of your neck, a whisper in the dark, a name you do not recall hearing, yet somehow have always known: Lysandra. Because certain nightmares never die, they merely wait for the right moment to return, until our next descent into history's shadows.